The acrid smell of burnt circuitry filled the cramped maintenance bay as Elias Mercer worked meticulously on the damaged battle armor. His fingers, calloused from years of technical work, moved with practiced precision across the intricate alien technology. The suit before him was a marvel of engineering, a seamless blend of Terran and Valkyrie design that had saved its wearer's life countless times. "How much longer, Technician Mercer?" Commander Nixera's voice came from behind him, the distinctive dual-toned resonance of her species making even simple questions sound like music. Elias didn't look up from his work. 20 minutes, Commander." The primary shield generator took a direct hit. "You're lucky you weren't vaporized." "Luck had nothing to do with it," she replied, moving closer. "It was skill." Despite himself, Elias smiled. The Valkyrie were notorious for their pride, but in Nixera's case, it was well earned. In the 3 months since the Alliance had paired them together, he'd seen her outmaneuver enemies that would have terrified seasoned human veterans. "Skill or not, you'll need this fixed before the briefing at 0800, he said, adjusting his magnification visor to examine a microscopic fracture in the power coupling. "Command doesn't care about your combat prowess if your suit fails in the vacuum." The silence that followed was comfortable, familiar. Elias had repaired her armor after every mission, a routine they'd fallen into without discussion. The hum of the ship's engines provided a gentle backdrop as he soldered a replacement connector into place. He was so focused on reconnecting the delicate neural interface wires that he almost didn't notice Nixera moving behind him. Almost, but years in combat zones had honed his awareness. Her presence radiated heat like a nearby star, impossible to ignore. What he wasn't prepared for was the gentle pressure at the nape of his neck. At first, he thought it was her examining his work over his shoulder, but then he felt the unmistakable sensation of lips, warm, slightly textured differently than human lips, pressing against his skin, just below his hairline. Elias froze, the soldering tool hovering millimeters above the armor's circuitry. A current that had nothing to do with electricity raced down his spine. "Commander?" His voice emerged hoarser than intended. When he turned, Nixera's iridescent eyes met his with their usual intensity. 4 feet taller than any human, her frame was imposing even without the armor. The geometric patterns of bioluminescent markings across her blue-gray skin pulsed slightly faster than normal, the Valkyrie equivalent of a blush, he'd learned. "You have saved my life 17 times, Elias Mercer," she said, using his first name for the first time. "Not just with your repairs, but with your modifications. The cooling system adjustment you made last mission prevented my suit from overheating when we were pinned down on Proxima 4. Elias swallowed hard. "Just doing my job, Commander." "Nixera," she corrected, her secondary voice harmonizing the syllables of her name in a way his human tongue never could. "When we are alone, I am Nixera." He nodded, unsure what had prompted this shift in their professional relationship. The Valkyrie were known for their rigid military hierarchy and emotional restraint. This, whatever this was, represented a significant departure from every protocol he'd been briefed on. "Your heart rate has increased by 37%, she observed, her head tilting slightly. The luminous patterns along her neck flared briefly. "Have I made you uncomfortable?" Surprised, he managed, setting down the soldering tool before he accidentally fried something important. "Valkyrie don't usually. I mean, the cultural briefing said your species considers physical contact reserved for those who have proven their worth through shared battle and sacrifice," she finished. "Yes. That is accurate." Before he could process the implications, the ship's alarm blared, bathing the maintenance bay in pulsing red light. "Attention all personnel," the ship's AI announced. "Hostile contact detected. Battle stations. Repeat, all personnel to battle stations." Nixera's expression shifted instantly to the commanding officer he knew. "Finish the repairs, technician. I need that armor operational now." As she strode toward the door, Elias called after her, "It won't hold for long without the secondary reinforcements." She paused at the threshold, looking back with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. "Then I will have to return to you, won't I?" The door hissed shut behind her, leaving Elias alone with the half-repaired armor and the lingering sensation of her kiss burning against his skin. The deck plating trembled beneath Elias's feet as the ship's defense systems engaged the unknown threat. His hands worked faster than his thoughts, completing the remaining repairs on Nyxera's armor with practiced efficiency. But his mind kept drifting back to that moment, the unexpected warmth of her lips on his neck. As he sealed the final power coupling, memories flooded back to their first meeting 6 months ago. The colony on Helios Prime had been under siege for 3 days when the Alliance dispatched emergency reinforcements. Elias, then a combat engineer with the 7th Expeditionary Force, had been tasked with securing the colony's failing shield generators while the main force engaged the enemy. He remembered the acrid taste of alien atmosphere filtering through his damaged rebreather as he crawled through maintenance tunnels, his squad cut down one by the enemy's relentless advance. By the time he reached the generator complex, he was alone, bleeding from a shrapnel wound in his side, and running on stimulants and desperation. The generator room was a war zone, half the equipment destroyed, the other half failing. And in the center of it all stood a lone Valkyrie warrior, surrounded by enemy corpses, still fighting. The first time he saw Nyxera, she was magnificent and terrifying, her armor scorched and cracked, one arm hanging uselessly at her side, but still she fought, her movements a deadly dance against 3 opponents. Elias had hesitated only for a moment before joining the fray. Between his remaining ammunition and her preternatural combat skills, they cleared the room. He'd immediately turned his attention to the generators, aware that thousands of colonist lives depended on restoring the shields before the next bombardment. "You are injured, human," she had stated, her dual-toned voice emotionless. "So are you," he'd replied, not looking up from the control panel he was rewiring. "And if I don't get these shields online in the next 3 minutes, we'll both be dead." Instead of leaving, she had positioned herself at the entrance, standing guard as he worked. "Then I will ensure you have those 3 minutes." They had survived, not just the generator room but the entire hellish campaign that followed. When the dust settled and the enemy retreated, both received commendations, and an unexpected joint assignment to the USS Horizon, an experimental vessel crewed by both humans and Valkyrie. Present reality crashed back as the ship rocked from another impact. Elias secured the final plate on the armor and activated the power sequence. The suit hummed to life, status indicators blinking from red to green as systems came online. The intercom crackled. "Technician Mercer to the bridge," Captain Rivera's voice commanded. "Bring Commander Nyxera's armor." "On my way," he responded, disconnecting the diagnostic equipment. As he gathered the armor components, Elias reflected on how their working relationship had evolved over their missions together. Nyxera had been coldly efficient at first, accepting his technical expertise but offering nothing beyond mission parameters. Slowly, mission by mission, repair by repair, something had changed. He recalled the turning point, after a particularly brutal engagement on Proxima 4. Their squad pinned down, communications cut off, and Nyxera's armor failing as environmental temperatures soared. Elias had jury-rigged a cooling system modification mid-battle, crawling through enemy fire to reach her position. "Why risk yourself?" she had asked later, as he repaired the more extensive damage back on the ship. "Same reason you stood guard at that generator on Helios," he'd answered simply. "We're a team." Something had shifted in her luminescent eyes then, a recognition, perhaps, or a reassessment. Since that day, she'd begun to share small insights into Valkyrie culture during their repair sessions. He learned that the geometric patterns on her skin told the story of her lineage and accomplishments. That the secondary harmonic in her voice conveyed emotional context that humans couldn't fully perceive. That her people believed strength came not from individual prowess but from the bonds forged in battle. He'd shared, too, stories of Earth, his family's farm in New Montana, his reasons for joining the Alliance. Small exchanges that built something neither had named. Until now. Until that kiss. The armor secure in its transport case, Elias made his way through corridors filled with personnel rushing to battle stations. His mind raced faster than his feet. Among humans, such a gesture would clearly indicate romantic interest. But Nixera wasn't human, and assuming human intentions behind alien actions had started more than one interspecies incident. Her words echoed in his mind, for those who have proven their worth through shared battle and sacrifice. Was this merely an acknowledgement of their professional bond? A Valkyrie custom he hadn't been briefed on? Or was it something else entirely? The bridge doors slid open, revealing organized chaos. Officers called out status reports as tactical displays showed multiple hostile vessels converging on their position. Captain Rivera stood at the command center, her face grim as she conferred with her Valkyrie counterpart. And there was Nixera, still in her undersuit, waiting for her armor. Their eyes met across the bridge, and for a fleeting moment, Elias saw those bioluminescent patterns pulse in what he now recognized as anticipation. "You kept your promise," she said as he approached, her voice pitched low for his ears alone. "Always do," he replied, setting down the case. "Though we might need to have a conversation about personal space when we're not about to be blown to atoms." A subtle ripple of light crossed her skin, the Valkyrie equivalent of a smile. "If we survive, Elias Mercer, we will have many conversations." As he helped her don the repaired armor, their fingers brushed, and Elias knew with sudden clarity that whatever had started in that maintenance bay was far from over. 3 days after the attack, the USS Horizon drifted in orbit around an uninhabited moon, undergoing emergency repairs. The hostile vessels, later identified as a splinter faction of Ordovian raiders, had been driven off, but not without cost. 2 crew members dead, 17 injured, and significant damage to the ship's port side. Elias hadn't seen Nixera since the battle's end. She'd been deployed with a strike team to ensure the raiders didn't return, while he'd been reassigned to critical hull repairs. The distance had given him time to think, perhaps too much time. He found her in the ship's observation deck, a circular room with a transparent ceiling that offered a stunning view of the Stars Cape above. She stood alone, armor removed, dressed in the simple gray undersuit that all Valkyrie wore when not in combat gear. Her back was to him, head tilted upward to the stars. "Your repairs held," she said without turning, those dual-toned vocals somehow both melodic and imposing. "Even when that raider vessel scored a direct hit." Elias moved to stand beside her, keeping a careful distance. "That's my job." "No." She turned then, those iridescent eyes focusing on him with unsettling intensity. "Your job was to make functional repairs. You made improvements. There is a difference." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Through the transparent ceiling, the moon's pale surface reflected starlight, casting the observation deck in soft, silvery illumination. "We should talk about what happened in the maintenance bay," Elias finally said. Nixera's head tilted slightly, a gesture he'd come to recognize as curiosity. "You mean the Vashtor?" She used a Valkyrie word his translator didn't catch. "If that's what you call kissing someone on the neck, then yes, the Vashtor." A ripple of blue-green light pulsed across her skin. "Interesting. Your translation matrix equates Vashtor with kissing. This explains your elevated heart rate afterward." Elias felt heat rise to his face. "What did you think would happen?" "In human culture, that kind of contact is, well, intimate. Among my people, the Vashtor is indeed intimate, but not in the way you imply." She moved closer, her 7-foot frame towering over him. It is a gesture between warriors who have faced death together repeatedly and formed a bond of trust. It acknowledges that one's life has been placed in the other's hands and found safe there. So it's not romantic? The patterns on her neck flared briefly. Valkyrie do not separate romance from battle bonds as distinctly as humans do. Our word kashtir encompasses both concepts. A potential mate must first be a trusted battle companion. Elias processed this, feeling simultaneously relieved and oddly disappointed. So you were recognizing me as a trusted comrade? I was recognizing you as Katerin, she said, using another untranslatable term. One whose skill complements my own. One whose presence makes survival more likely. She paused, studying his reaction. But I sense this has different connotations for humans. You could say that, Elias replied with a wry smile. For us, kissing, especially on the neck, usually signals romantic or sexual interest. Nixera's secondary voice harmonics shifted to a register he hadn't heard before. I see. This explains Lieutenant Kwan's reaction when I attempted to honor her with Vashtor after she coordinated our extraction from Proxima 4. Despite himself, Elias laughed. I'm guessing she didn't take it well? She avoided me for 7 solar cycles and filed a cultural sensitivity report, Nixera admitted, the luminescent patterns across her skin pulsing in what Elias had come to recognize as embarrassment. They both turned back to the stars, a more comfortable silence settling between them. Below, maintenance drones swarmed over the ship's damaged hull like luminous insects. In the interest of preventing further misunderstandings, Elias ventured, maybe you could teach me more about Valkyrie customs? And I could explain human ones? Nixera considered this. A practical suggestion. Cultural literacy would improve our combat efficiency. Right. Combat efficiency. Exactly what I was thinking, Elias said, unable to keep the sarcasm from his voice. She turned to him with unexpected swiftness. You mock me, but you do not understand. For my people, there is no separation between what you call personal and professional bonds. A Valkyrie warrior's greatest strength comes from those they fight alongside. The closer the bond, the stronger the unit. I didn't mean to offend. You did not, she interrupted. But you should understand what it meant when I offered you Vashtor. It was not done lightly. Her voice dropped to a lower register. In 300 cycles of service, I have only offered it to 5 others. Elias felt the weight of this revelation. And how many of them are still alive? The light patterns across her skin dimmed. 2. Both now serve in different sectors. Understanding dawned on him. You've lost people too. She nodded once, a distinctly human gesture she'd adopted since joining the Horizon's crew. Loss is inevitable in war. But among my people, to offer Vashtor is to say, your loss would diminish me. The simple statement hit Elias with unexpected force. How many comrades had he lost over the years? How many times had he built emotional walls to avoid the pain of those losses? Among humans, he said carefully, we sometimes keep our distance from fellow soldiers. Professional but not personal. It's supposed to make it easier when they die, Nixera finished. A curious strategy. Does it work? Elias thought of faces he'd tried to forget, names he'd stopped saying aloud. No. Not really. Nixera's expression shifted subtly, the geometric patterns on her face reconfiguring in a way he couldn't interpret. Then perhaps there is wisdom in the Valkyrie way. We acknowledge the bond while it exists, knowing it strengthens us both in battle. She raised a 4-fingered hand, hesitating just short of touching his face. I offered you Vashtor because you have proven yourself worthy of such acknowledgement. But I would not cause you cultural discomfort. Elias surprised himself by catching her hand before she could withdraw it. Her skin was warmer than a human's, with a subtle texture like fine suede. Maybe, he said, we can find a middle ground between our cultures. Something that works for both of us. The ship's intercom crackled to life before she could respond. Commander Nixera and Technician Mercer, report to Briefing Room 2 immediately. The moment broken, Nixera stepped back, her posture shifting to military precision. We are called to duty. Story of our lives, Elias muttered, falling into step beside her as they headed for the door. But as they walked through the corridors, he noticed she matched her stride to his shorter one, a small accommodation she had never made before. And he realized that whatever was developing between them, it wouldn't fit neatly into either of their cultural categories. It would be something entirely new, forged in the space between worlds. Ambush point confirmed at coordinate 72, Delta, 19, Captain Rivera's voice was terse as she outlined the mission parameters. The tactical display showed a narrow canyon on the moon's surface where intelligence suggested the Ordovician raiders had established a temporary base. Our objective is to neutralize their communications array and gather intel on potential further attacks. The briefing room was tense, filled with the mixed team of human and Valkyrie operatives who would execute the ground mission. Elias sat near the back, not usually included in combat briefings, but his technical expertise was deemed essential for this operation. Commander Nixera will lead the ground team, Rivera continued, nodding toward the Valkyrie officer. Technician Mercer will accompany to disable their security systems and extract data cores. Nixera's luminescent patterns pulsed once in acknowledgement. Her eyes met Elias's briefly across the room, but her expression revealed nothing to the others present. Deployment in 30 minutes. Suit up and prepare for drop. Rivera's final words dismissed the team to their preparations. As the room cleared, Elias found himself walking alongside Lieutenant Wei, a combat specialist who joined the Horizon's crew after the Proxima IV campaign. First time in the field, Tech? Wei asked, her tone somewhere between curious and concerned. Not exactly, Elias replied. I was combat engineering before ship assignment. Wei raised an eyebrow. Still, going groundside with Commander Nixera, that's intense. She doesn't tolerate errors. I'm aware of her standards, Elias said evenly. Wei leaned closer, lowering her voice. Word is she's been acting strange lately. More interactive with the human crew. Not like a typical Valkyrie commander. Elias kept his expression neutral despite the sudden alertness he felt. We've all been adapting to this joint mission structure. Sure, but, Wei's comment was cut short as Nixera appeared at the corridor junction ahead of them, her imposing presence causing several crew members to step aside. Technician Mercer, she called, her dual-toned voice carrying clearly. Your combat equipment requires inspection before deployment. Wei gave Elias a knowing look that made him uncomfortable. Good luck down there, she said, before continuing toward the armory. Nixera waited until Wei was out of earshot. Your combat certification was updated this morning, she said, falling into step beside him. Captain Rivera was concerned about sending a technician into potential heavy combat. And you? Elias asked. I reminded her of your record on Helios Prime. The geometric patterns on her face shifted subtly. And that I would personally ensure your safety. They reached the equipment bay where Elias's rarely used combat gear had been prepared. Unlike Nixera's integrated battle armor, human combat suits were more modular and significantly less advanced. As he began the familiar process of suiting up, he noticed Nixera inspecting each piece with critical attention. Your armor is inadequate, she finally stated. It's standard issue, Elias replied, securing the chest plate. Standard is insufficient. She activated her wrist interface, and moments later, a Valkyrie quartermaster arrived with additional components. These shield augmenters were calibrated for human physiology during our joint exercises. They will provide 37% more protection. The modification was technically against protocol, mixing technologies without proper clearance, but Elias recognized the gesture for what it was, concern for his safety. "Thank you," he said simply, accepting the Valkyrie components. Her patterns pulsed once in acknowledgement. "We drop in 15 minutes. The descent to the moon's surface was smooth until the final approach. Their dropship rocked violently as unexpected anti-aircraft fire erupted from hidden emplacements in the canyon walls. "Evasive action," the pilot shouted, banking hard. "They were waiting for us." Nixera's voice cut through the chaos. "Maintain course to secondary landing zone. We proceed as planned." The ship lurched again as another blast grazed their hull. With a grinding sound of tearing metal, the port stabilizer failed, sending them into a controlled crash toward the lunar surface. "Brace for impact," was the last thing Elias heard before the world became a cacophony of screeching metal and impact alarms. He regained consciousness to the sound of weapons fire and Nixera pulling him from the wreckage. His helmet display flickered, showing minor suit breaches but environmental integrity holding. "Status report," she demanded, her armor showing scorch marks but appearing functionally intact. "Operational," Elias managed, running a quick diagnostic on his suit systems. The Valkyrie shield augmenters glowed faintly, having absorbed the worst of the impact. "What happened to the others?" "Scattered during landing," Nixera replied, helping him to cover behind a rocky outcropping as projectile fire pinged off the stones around them. "Comm systems are being jammed, but emergency protocols are in effect. The team will converge on the objective." Through the dust and chaos, Elias could make out the communications array they'd been sent to destroy, now heavily guarded by Ordovision forces who had clearly anticipated their arrival. "Someone leaked our mission parameters," Elias realized grimly. "Likely," Nixera agreed, checking her weapon systems. "But the objective remains unchanged. We need to reach the array control center." A quick scan revealed at least 20 hostiles between their position and the target. "Two-person frontal assault seems suicidal," Elias observed. "Not an assault," Nixera corrected. "A diversion. I will engage their front line while you circle to the eastern approach." She pointed to a narrow ravine barely visible in the distance. "Their focus on me will allow you to reach the control center undetected." Elias frowned. "That's putting you against overwhelming odds." The patterns across her skin pulsed with what he now recognized as determination. "I have faced worse." "Not alone," he countered. "We stick together." "This is not a debate, technician," she said, her voice hardening. "This is tactical necessity." Before he could argue further, the distinctive whine of Ordovision hover tanks echoed through the canyon. 3 armored vehicles crested the ridge above them, turrets swiveling to locate targets. "New plan," Elias said, pulling a device from his equipment pack. "How good is your timing?" 5 minutes later, Nixera sprinted across open ground, drawing concentrated fire from the Ordovision forces. Her armor's advanced shielding flared with each impact, but held. The enemy forces converged on her position exactly as predicted, hover tanks advancing to cut off her retreat. Meanwhile, Elias had circled behind the main force, using the terrain and the distraction Nixera provided to approach the communications array from its blind spot. The modified EMP device in his hand was primed and ready. In position, he whispered into the comm link, knowing Nixera could hear him despite the jamming affecting longer-range communications. "Confirmed," came her terse reply, followed by the sounds of intense combat. Elias watched the tactical display on his helmet as Nixera's position indicator suddenly reversed direction, sprinting directly toward the hover tanks rather than away from them. The Ordovision forces hesitated, clearly confused by this suicidal change in tactics. That moment of hesitation was all they needed. Elias activated the EMP, and a localized pulse rippled across the battlefield, temporarily disabling the hover tank's shield systems. In the same instant, Nyxera leapt atop the lead tank, her armor's enhanced strength allowing her to tear through the suddenly vulnerable armor plating. The resulting explosion created a chain reaction among the tightly grouped enemy forces. Elias used the chaos to breach the communications array's primary access point, quickly bypassing security systems and uploading the virus that would both disable their communications and extract the intelligence they needed. He was so focused on the task that he didn't notice the Ordovician soldier approaching from behind until it was almost too late. A warning shout in Nyxera's distinctive dual-toned voice made him duck just as weapons fire passed over his head. Spinning around, Elias found himself face-to-face with an Ordovician raider, its insectoid features twisted in what might have been anger. Acting on instinct, he used the close-quarters combat techniques drilled into all Alliance personnel, but the physically stronger opponent began to overpower him. A blur of motion announced Nyxera's arrival. She tore the raider away from Elias with terrifying efficiency, dispatching it before turning back to him with concern evident in her luminescent patterns. "You're injured," she observed, indicating a breach in his armor where caustic Ordovician blood had begun to eat through the material. "Superficial," Elias replied, turning back to complete the data extraction. "Almost done here." Around them, sounds of combat intensified as the rest of their team finally converged on their position, engaging the remaining enemy forces. The mission was nearly complete. As the final data packets transferred, Elias felt a strange lightness overtake him. Looking down, he realized the Ordovician's blood had penetrated deeper than he'd thought, introducing toxins into his system. "Nyxera," he managed, his vision beginning to blur. "I think I might need a medic after all." He felt her catch him as his knees buckled. Through fading consciousness, he saw the alarm in her luminescent patterns as she called urgently for evacuation. And in that moment of vulnerability, acting purely on instinct rather than cultural understanding, Elias reached up and placed his hand at the base of Nyxera's neck, approximating as best he could the Vashtor she had given him in the maintenance bay. The last thing he registered before darkness claimed him was the stunned reaction of the human squad members who had just arrived, and the sudden, brilliant flare of light across Nyxera's skin as she understood exactly what he had done. Elias awoke to the sterile white ceiling of the Horizon's medical bay. The soft hum of monitoring equipment filled the air as his consciousness gradually reassembled itself. His body felt leaden, muscles stiff from disuse. How long had he been here? 3 days, 14 hours, and 22 minutes, came Nyxera's voice from beside him, as if she'd read his thoughts. "That is how long you have been unconscious." Elias turned his head, even that small movement requiring effort, to find her seated beside his bed. She wore her standard gray undersuit rather than armor, an unusual sight outside her private quarters. More surprising was the fact that she appeared to have been there a while, a data tablet discarded on a nearby table suggesting she'd been working from this position. "The mission?" His voice emerged as a rasp. "Successful." Her luminescent patterns pulsed with what he now recognized as satisfaction. "The data you extracted revealed the Ordovician's entire attack strategy for this sector. Alliance forces have already neutralized 2 of their forward bases." Elias tried to sit up, but a firm hand on his shoulder kept him in place. "Dr. Patel was explicit that you should not attempt movement yet," Nyxera said. "The Ordovician toxin damaged your peripheral nervous system. Regenerative therapy is still in progress." He settled back, taking stock of his condition. Beyond the weakness, he felt surprisingly little pain. "How bad was it?" "Without the Valkyrie shield augmenters I provided, you would have died instantly," she stated with characteristic bluntness. "As it was, we nearly lost you during emergency transport." A subtle flickering in her patterns betrayed emotion that her voice did not. It was unacceptable. "Sorry to worry you," he said, attempting a smile that felt lopsided. "You should be," she replied, but without heat. "Your actions were both heroic and foolish. A common human combination, I'm told." A memory surfaced through the fog of his recovery, reaching for her neck as consciousness faded, the surprised looks of their squad mates. Before I passed out, did I try to? You performed Vashtor, she confirmed, her secondary voice harmonics shifting to a register he hadn't heard before. Imperfectly, but unmistakably. Heat rose to his face. In front of the entire squad. Yes. It has become a topic of significant discussion among both human and Valkyrie crew members. The patterns on her face reconfigured in what he now recognized as amusement. Lieutenant Wei has asked me 3 times if we are a thing now. Despite his discomfort, Elias couldn't help but laugh, then winced as the movement pulled at muscles still in recovery. And what did you tell her? That human terminology is imprecise, and Valkyrie concepts don't translate well. Nixera leaned forward slightly, her iridescent eyes intense. But in truth, I did not have an answer. The admission hung between them, unexpectedly vulnerable coming from the usually decisive commander. Captain Rivera has requested clarification as well, Nixera continued. There are protocols regarding intimate relationships between officers of different species, particularly those in the same command structure. Intimate, Elias repeated, the word carrying weight he wasn't sure how to bear in his current state. Is that what this is? Nixera's head tilted in that now familiar gesture of consideration. Among my people, what has developed between us would be called Kashtiravens, a battle bond of unusual depth. It is considered both sacred and practical, as such connections produce superior combat outcomes. Very romantic, Elias said dryly. You misunderstand, she replied. For the Valkyrie, there is no higher form of connection. What humans separate into categories, friend, comrade, lover, we view as aspects of a single continuum. The deeper the bond, the more it encompasses. She paused, the patterns across her skin shifting in complex waves that suggested she was choosing her words carefully. What I did not explain fully is that Vashtor can have different intentions depending on context. When offered to a respected comrade, it acknowledges their value. But when returned? What happens when it's returned? Elias asked when she didn't continue. It indicates willingness to explore the full spectrum of the bond, she said, her dual-toned voice taking on a quality he couldn't quite interpret. Including aspects humans would consider intimate. The realization of what he'd inadvertently communicated sent a jolt through Elias that had nothing to do with his injuries. And I did this in front of everyone. Yes. It was. For the first time since he'd known her, Nixera seemed to struggle for words. Unexpected. The silence that followed was neither comfortable nor uncomfortable, simply weighted with possibility. Through the medical bay's viewport, stars gleamed against the void, indifferent to the complexities of those who navigated among them. The question remains, Nixera finally said, did you understand what you were communicating when you performed Vashtor? Elias considered deflecting, blaming the toxin or the heat of battle. But something in her expression, a vulnerability he'd never seen before, demanded honesty. Not exactly, he admitted. But I understood enough. I knew it meant something significant to you, and in that moment. He paused, gathering courage. In that moment, I wanted you to know that whatever it meant to you, I felt it too. The luminescent patterns across her skin flared so brightly they cast shadows on the far wall, a reaction so strong it surprised even him. That, she said softly, is perhaps the most profound understanding of Vashtor I have ever encountered from a non-Valkyrie. Before Elias could respond, the medical bay doors slid open, admitting Dr. Patel and Lieutenant Wei. Their conversation halted abruptly when they noticed Elias was awake. About time, Mercer, Wei said with a grin. Half the ship had bets on when you'd rejoin the living. Her eyes darted between him and Nixera with poorly concealed curiosity. Dr. Patel moved efficiently to check his vitals, her expression warming slightly as she noted the readings. Excellent progress. Another day of regenerative therapy, and you should be ready for light duty. The captain wishes to see both of you when medical clears it, Wei added. Something about clarifying command structure implications and interspecies protocol reviews. She made air quotes, her amusement evident. Nixera stood, her imposing height drawing all eyes. Inform the captain that we will report as soon as Technician Mercer is cleared. Her tone left no room for Wei's teasing. Yes, Commander, Wei replied, still smirking as she and Patel departed. When they were alone again, Nixera turned back to Elias. This will complicate matters. Facing down Ordovician raiders was simpler, he agreed. Perhaps, she said, but I have never placed high value on simplicity. She moved closer to the bed, her presence somehow both intimidating and comforting. The Valkyrie have a saying, complexity breeds strength when properly aligned. What does that mean for us? Elias asked. It means, she said, lowering herself to sit on the edge of his bed, that we need not choose between human ways and Valkyrie traditions. We can create something new. Her hand moved to rest lightly over his. Something uniquely ours. Looking at their hands, hers with 4 fingers and iridescent skin patterns, his 5-fingered and scarred from years of technical work, Elias was struck by the improbability of their connection. Born on different worlds, physiologically distinct, raised in cultures that viewed the universe through fundamentally different lenses. Yet here they were. I think I'd like that, he said finally. Something uniquely ours. Then it is decided, she stated with characteristic Valkyrie certainty. When you are recovered, we will begin exploring this new territory, together. Just like that? Elias asked, amused by her directness. Just like that, she confirmed. Then, with a subtle shift in her luminescent patterns that he was learning to read as humor, she added, though perhaps with fewer Ordovician toxins involved. Agreed, he laughed. And maybe fewer witnesses the next time you decide to kiss my neck. The term is Vashter, she corrected primly, but the patterns on her skin pulsed in what he now recognized as affection. And I make no promises about witnesses. Valkyrie are not known for their discretion in matters of battle bonds. As the ship hummed around them, continuing its journey through the stars, Elias realized that this, whatever it was becoming, would never fit neatly into either of their world's categories. It would be as unique as the circumstances that created it, shaped by both their traditions yet bound by neither. A bridge between worlds, built one gesture, one misunderstanding, one moment of connection at a time. And for now, that was enough. 3 weeks later, as the USS Horizon prepared to depart for its next assignment, the crew had largely adjusted to what some called the strangest pairing since humans and Valkyrie first formed the alliance. Protocols had been reviewed, accommodations made, and the initial flurry of gossip had given way to acceptance. In the maintenance bay where it had all begun, Elias worked on Nixera's battle armor, preparing it for the combat exercise scheduled for the following day. His hands moved with practiced precision across the familiar technology, but now with even greater attention to detail. The left shoulder stabilizer is still misaligned by 0.3 degrees, Nixera observed from where she stood nearby, monitoring his work with characteristically intense focus. I'm aware, Elias replied without looking up. I'm compensating for the new alloy we're testing. It needs room for thermal expansion during atmospheric entry. She made a sound that he'd come to recognize as approval. You continue to anticipate factors that others would overlook. That's why you keep me around, he said with a smile. Nixera moved closer, the luminescent patterns across her skin shifting to the configuration that he now knew indicated deep satisfaction. One of many reasons, she corrected. As he completed the final adjustments, she placed a hand lightly on his shoulder, a gesture that would have been unthinkable from a Valkyrie commander just months ago. The crew members working across the bay pretended not to notice, though Elias caught a few knowing glances. What do you think awaits us at Proxima Centauri? he asked as he sealed the armor's access panel. Unknown threats. Unexpected challenges. Nyxera's dual-toned voice held something that might have been anticipation. New opportunities to strengthen our bond through shared battle. Most humans would suggest dinner and a hull of it instead, Elias remarked. We are not most humans, she replied. Then, with deliberate precision, she leaned down and pressed her lips to the nape of his neck, a perfect Vashtor that sent a familiar warmth through his body. No, Elias agreed, reaching up to return the gesture with growing confidence. We are definitely not. Around them, the ship hummed as it prepared for the jump to hyperspace, carrying them toward whatever awaited in the vast unknown, challenges they would face as neither fully human nor Valkyrie, but as something new forged in the spaces between worlds. Something stronger than either could have been alone.